not gonna try that. I can't do that. I can't dance. I have
he
no
can teach you one day, maybe. You guys can hang
Yeah.
out, give you
I
some
mean,
lessons.
that would be a long mood walk from Newmarket. So bring some good shoes.
A little bit about me personally. I've been a software dev for almost 10 years. Not quite, but almost. It's getting there. And I've worked on JavaScript full stack. I've done all the front end frameworks, React, Angular, Vue. I've touched all of them in production. I've done Node.js on the back end, of course. I've done a little bit of Feathers. I've done a little bit of Express. Well, a lot of Express. I've done a little bit of Adonis.js and of course, Postgres and Mongo, but I've also done bunches of Java work and I've done bunches of
I'm
Rails.
sorry.
I know.
I'm sorry.
No, the thing about Java is it'll teach you discipline the hard way, but it'll teach you. There's a lot to be said about in-demand tech skills, and I want to move us in that area. Before we do that, just wanted to say thank you, Anthony, to you and the StepSend team for making this event possible. I know you guys are building a GraphQL-based startup, and there's a lot of information about StepSend in the. I'm sure we'll talk about StepSend as we talk about GraphQL, because that's definitely an in-demand front-end technology. And I definitely want to hear all about what you guys are doing and what your experience with GraphQL has been. I think that'll offer a lot of value to our audience today. You know what? Let's just dive into it. Let's just dive into it, and let's talk about what we all feel is in demand. I could go first, Andre. You could go first, Anthony. You know what, Andre? What's your take on it? You're hosting Jamstack Toronto. You've been involved in Jamstack. From your perspective, what's the most in demand front end skill right now?
Sorry, let me get close to my mic. I'll give you a quick sort of like idea of how I got into the Jamstack. And I remember, out of sort of, I'd heard the term sort of being batting around, and I was like, okay, what are these young devs doing again? Trying to like upend, the web and whatnot. But when I poked around and I kind of saw what was going on, I was like, okay. And my actual foray into the Jamstack was through web performance. And because at the time, I knew a few people who were working at Gatsby, and they're like, Gatsby's fast, Gatsby's fast. I was like, all right, fast Gatsby people, come do a presentation at Toronto Web Perf, which is one of the meetups that I help run, that I actually run personally. So after discovering that, and then sort of deep diving into the Jamstack afterwards, I mean, if I could summarize it in sort of like a couple words, I think the API ecosystem is what I believe is something that you should have a good understanding of and move forward from there, simply because, and I'm looking at it more as a Jamstack perspective, it is sort of like the glue that helps put everything together. And to an extent, I'd even go as to saying, if you come from a particular era where, say, or I shouldn't say era, but a certain sort of like side of the web that's very comfortable, say, with WordPress, and you want to sort of step away from that, progress from, that sort of ecosystem, even, being able to use WordPress, a headless WordPress sort of like situation, understanding, the API ecosystem is what's going to sort of like take you forward, and sort of like a modern development speak, if I could say that much. And as I sort of like, and I mentioned that not to sort of like, pick away at certain technologies, because ultimately that's what's going to sort of mesh everything together. And in fact, I say that as, I had a conversation with this company called Take Shape recently, who are working on something to sort of like ease a bit of like, because you can go overboard with the APIs a bit. I mean, things can get a little bit complicated. But either way, being sort of like read in that space, I think is going to help. I'm actually also going to come back and touch on what I just mentioned right there, which is web performance. There was a time where web performance was a very small group of people. We sort of sat there in our corner and knew each other. It's an area of the web that wasn't really well known or understood or really recognized. But more so now, I think people are paying a bit more attention for a number of reasons. But I like to see people well read in that space who kind of understand what it takes to sort of like launch an app as best as possible. I have to apologize because something is that my Slack or is that someone else? I hope it's not mine. I'll have to deal with that afterwards. I'm so sorry. Now, where am I here? Let me go back. Okay, here I'm back. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned the web performance because it is a bit near dear to my heart, and it's the sort of first area of the web that I really start to pay attention to, sort of like outside of the classic like front end development. Hey, cool, I'm here. But I start to really look at this web performance thing because I was like, hey, what is this? This is kind of cool, And I met some of the sort of like more sort of like well-read people in that field. And yeah, it's one that I always sort of slide into the conversation whenever I bring this up.
A question for the audience on that point. What's your favorite API? What are you working with? If you could drop that in chat, it'll help us to guide this conversation to something that everybody is more familiar with and is more relevant to everyone. So question for the audience, what's your favorite API? What APIs have you worked with recently or are working on right now? Drop them in the Zoom chat. You can find the Zoom chat button at the bottom of your Zoom bar. It's called chat. Click there, drop the name of whatever tech you're working with, whatever API you're working with. I'm working with Stripe. If anybody else is working on Stripe right now, let me know.
I mean, you want to make that money, right?
Oh yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. Gotta monetize.
Let's go. I'm not mad at that.
No. Money brings people together. It's good. Anthony, what's your take on it? So Andre said APIs and web performance. What about you? What do you think is the most hot in demand tech right now in front end?
Yeah, I think that those are both great answers. And if you specialize in either of those, you're going to be set. If I was though going to give like kind of general advice, almost as like a stupidly simple answer, it's one word. It's JavaScript. The in-demand skill is JavaScript. So the question was like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to know JavaScript? Does that mean you know JavaScript frameworks? Does that mean you know JavaScript libraries? Does that mean you can write vanilla JavaScript? The way I would probably put it is that you should know enough JavaScript to pick up any JavaScript framework. I think that is a really good space to be in because it's really hard to say. It's very easy to say right now the JavaScript framework to learn is React. It's very easy to say that is the popular choice. That is where the most jobs are. That is what you should learn. But I don't think that's really a super great answer because React will not always be the most popular framework. Like there was a point in time when people thought jQuery would be the only thing you would ever need to learn for JavaScript. And that's obviously not the case right now. So I think if you know enough JavaScript to get your hands on other JavaScript tech, that's going to give you the flexibility to move within different teams and different ecosystems. But you're never going to get away from JavaScript, at least, maybe in a long time once WebAssembly takes over. But I think that if you want to really invest in a single skill that's going to get you very far and help you slot into almost any place, then learning JavaScript is going to be the way to go.
So we got JavaScript. I'm guessing that means vanilla JavaScript, just basic meat and potatoes JavaScript, Anthony, or what do you mean by learn JavaScript? Because I can learn JavaScript, I can learn JavaScript and then add on TypeScript on top of that. I can learn JavaScript in a minimalistic way. Like, what do you mean? What is JavaScript when you say JavaScript? What is that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, when people say vanilla JavaScript, they usually mean learn JavaScript outside of a framework. So they don't mean learn React or Vue or Svelte. They mean learn callbacks and promises and async await and things like that. And I would actually take it a different direction and say that beyond vanilla JavaScript, what you actually want to learn is you want to learn the DOM. So if you don't know what the DOM is what's known as the document object model. And it's not really JavaScript and it's not really HTML. It's kind of this weird hybrid between the two of them, where you can write JavaScript that's going to affect your website. So if you think, I want to have a button, and that button is going to increment a counter from 0 to 1, you can write code that will actually change what's going to be in your HTML. And the way you do that is with the DOM. So I would actually say that the DOM is really what you should be learning beyond just JavaScript, the language, because if you learn JavaScript, the language, that'll teach you what loops are. That'll teach you what variables are, if then conditional kind of statements. And you can learn that in any language. But what makes JavaScript unique and what makes the web unique is how JavaScript is actually used to manipulate web pages. And that all happens in the DOM. So this is something that I actually felt pretty lucky that my bootcamp did actually cover. This is they had us start with JavaScript, and then they had us write like DOM components, where you would write something that's kind of like a React component, but without using React. They would show you how to actually do like a query selector, and then how to do the inner HTML and how to get it onto the page. And then after that, they're like, okay, now that you know how to do this, there's actually these frameworks that do this for you. But so many people jump ahead of that step. They jump straight to the React, and then they learn React, and they learn how to make applications with React, and it works, but they never learn the DOM. They don't even necessarily know what the DOM is. And so then when they start hitting all these weird errors with React, like, I don't understand these errors. Like, what does all this mean? And it's because they don't understand the base layer of what React is actually doing.
Love it. It's really interesting how you guys contrast. And I want to bring attention to how you guys are contrasting right now, because Andre, you said APIs, Anthony, and you said web performance. I'll get to that, but you said APIs, which is really interesting, because Anthony is going the opposite direction and saying, okay, well, learning how to be master of your own element in your own website is really important. You should know how to see through the matrix and manipulate it. Like that's what knowing the DOM gives you, is it lets you do anything on your website. And Andre, you're saying, okay, APIs are super important. And you said this word ecosystem, the API ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes in the opposite direction, which is, okay, there's stuff outside of the browser and there's stuff outside of your website. And how do you take advantage of that stuff through this weird thing that not everybody over here understands, judging from some of the comments coming in, judging from that. I don't think everybody fully understands the implications of APIs. Maybe we should get into that too, but
I mean, is my mic on? Yes. So, I didn't know exactly where I'd want to start. So, and without having a good sort of understanding of potentially where people want what people want to discuss. But I mean, I would actually agree with Anthony on this as well. It's funny because I was actually going to go look for it, but I'm like trying to find a search term in my head. But there was that recent, I don't want to make it sound like Twitter is news, right? Like we're all like, oh, what's the news like today?
You and I are the news. We are Twitter.
But I'm gonna bring it back to this tweet and / meme that I'm sure a few of us saw. I'm sure Anthony saw it. Like it's that one meme where the gentleman, someone's going up some stairs, and the first step is like HTML, the second step CSS, the third step is JavaScript, the fourth step is React, and he goes right to React. And
like TypeScript was the last step, actually.
Potentially, but it's a fact that they skipped everything and went straight to React. And like you said, React is definitely a massive component of development right now. Will it be 10 years from now, 5 years from now? We're not sure. But the idea that JavaScript is likely, where you want to spend some time is correct. And it's simply because you can talk about learning React, because the argument in that thread, by the way, for anyone who wasn't familiar with it and didn't read it, was like, you can get a job by learning React, and that's what you'll do at this job, and just do React without having a really clear understanding of what's taking place. But if you get the job done, that's it. And there's another side of people who argue that, well, it would be nice if you had some fundamentals, in this case, like Anthony said, understanding JavaScript so that you could sort of jump from, framework to framework or library, and sort of have a better understanding of what's taking place. Uh, I'm sort of team, JavaScript in the sense that, having a better understanding of what's going on so that, you can just look at something. It's kind of like being a mechanic, right? If I've been a Volkswagen mechanic all my life, a Volkswagen shows up, I know how to fix it. What happens when the Cadillac shows up? And I'm just like, what's going on here? And the point is that if you became a mechanic first and had the fundamentals of, you know, uh, engines and everything that goes on within an engine, combustion engine, so you could jump from car to car and be like, oh yeah, just give me a minute, I kind of see what they're doing here. Okay, fine, I can fix this car. So that said, I do like Anthony's answer. I just didn't know where to start, kind of. But I would definitely start there. I'll give you a quick joke. It is a bit of a joke, actually. When I joined my agency a long time ago, and during the interview process, yada yada yada, and they asked me, and there are days where I'm just like, man, was I drunk? But they asked me what needed to be sort of like what was going to be either like the hot language or whatever. And at the time, like frameworks weren't really big, but I was like, I think people need to know JavaScript, and I was saying like JavaScript is going to with JavaScript you'll be able to make it snow in the summertime, and like that's how powerful JavaScript is going to be. And this was just my mild hunch, but I just like, let me fill the air with something, and it became true. I think that persons out there, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries, who sort of go into some depth of JavaScript will be, I think, well rewarded. And I'd even go as far as saying that this is something that was being discussed even I mentioned WordPress earlier today. And we know what WordPress is, sort of like a giant sort of like CMS that runs 41% of the web right now. But there was a time where 4 or 5 years ago, Photomat, so Matt Mulwig, who is sort of like the CEO or whatever, runs WordPress ecosystem. He had asked his developers and mom and pop shop developers, whatever, to sort of get into some JavaScript depth, because this was going to, like, moving forward, WordPress is going to adopt it a lot more, and he wanted people to sort of stay up to date. So yes, I agree with the JavaScript notion.
Yeah, yeah, I can vouch for that for sure. Because when I started, it was in Rails. Is
Mm.
what my first job was in, and my first projects were my first serious projects ended up being in Java and JavaScript. And no matter what I did, if it was Rails, if it was Java, I even did a little bit of PHP. No matter what I did back then, JavaScript was just a part of it. Because guess what? You can't get away from it because it's in the browser. And as long as you have browsers, you're going to have JavaScript. End of story. Unless what you mentioned in chat, Andre, about WebAssembly. If WebAssembly's potential comes true, then all bets are off on JavaScript. But even then, why would you? In the beginning, it's going to take years for that for different languages to start exposing themselves in the browser. I'm not going to steal your thunder over there. I want you to talk about it, because I think you'll have interesting ideas if I know where you're going.
You know what? I only put that in simply because a couple reasons. Someone mentioned it, and I was like, oh my God, let me throw that in there. But also because I know the organizers, so I just wanted to give them a little shout out. Oh my God, there's Surma over at Google, and obviously I was talking to him yesterday.
Jake
Aaron
Archibald?
Turner. Yeah, well,
Aaron
Jake's
Turner,
probably
yeah.
involved, and Aaron Turner, who's one of the persons involved there. So, but yeah, I mean, like, without getting into heavy depth, but definitely WASM is something that's being sort of dealt with. But I get back to the idea that everyone sort of like agreed with here, that JavaScript, runs in a browser, runs in a backend too. You know what I mean? So it's the only language that, relishes in having, waking up in the morning going like, where am I going to go, front or back? Because I'm good either way. You know what I mean? So these are things that gave it essentially superpowers. So spending, like, no one's going to tell you you're spending too much time in JavaScript, which is why probably, a lot of JavaScript devs seem to have a little, chip on the shoulder kind of thing. But, they're all still cool.
My Java friends would disagree. My Java friends give me flack all the time for being a primarily JavaScript developer. They're like, "Oh man, what are you doing in JavaScript?" I'm like, "Guys, you don't know what you're missing out on." No, Java's the shit, man. Java's the shit. And
They're like, what are you doing over there in JavaScript? Making money?
yeah, right.
Well, that's the thing is, yeah, everyone who does a language that's not JavaScript talks crap about JavaScript because it's the thing. Like, and people who don't do it and don't want to do it, that's why they get a chip on their shoulders. They think that they're entitled to not have to write JavaScript, and that there's so many cultural things around language. It's so strange.
Interesting.
I know, Anthony, you have this thing about culture and history like I do, and we have that in common. The way I see it, I just want to dig there a little bit and talk about why JavaScript gets that kind of flack. And I know a lot of people will have heard this about JavaScript, and I'm sure they have some questions about it. But yeah, you can make a ton of money on JavaScript. What do you think it is that there's a culture war over here where JavaScript seems to just not be looked at as in a certain way? It almost feels religious. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's because it was put in a very special place by being the only language that runs in the browser. So it was very privileged in the sense that if you wanted to write a website with any sort of functionality, you're going to have to write JavaScript. So that's where you end up with a lot of people who, regardless of what language they want to write, they're in a position where they are just told, like, you have to write this in JavaScript because this needs to work on the web. And if it doesn't work on the web, then it's like not what we want, So it's very much forces a lot of people into this box. And I find that there's, people have two reactions to that. They react against it and have that, very much like they already know a language that they really like they really like Ruby because they were a Rails developer, or they really like maybe Elixir because they're doing like Phoenix, and they already have a language that they like that works well for them and that probably does work nicer than JavaScript. Because even the people who do write JavaScript, we don't like everything about JavaScript either. Let me tell you, the people who write JavaScript every day have probably the most complaints about JavaScript. But there's people who just constantly react against it and push against it and want to say, I want to write my languages that I enjoy and that makes sense to my brain. And then there's the other people who are more kind of pragmatic, and they're like, well, if everyone wants JavaScript, I'm going to learn JavaScript. I'm going to be the best freaking JavaScript developer anyone has ever known. And that's going to be the thing I'm going to learn. I'm going to master it. And because they master it and because it's everywhere, that leads to a lot of opportunities. And that's why this whole conversation started and has continued to be about JavaScript and the opportunities that JavaScript gives you.
I'm going to follow that up as well, and not to interrupt, but I'm going to follow that up as well, just to remind people that, as you said, it runs in the browser. The browser is, someone had, I'm going to find the tweet after I finish this little bit right here, but someone had mentioned that the browser was the single greatest application, bar none. And I actually agreed, because if you consider what the browser has enabled the planet to do is phenomenal. Um, the browser is on everyone's device, desktop, handheld, varying handhelds, from like your new iPhone 12 right down to your $50 device that you can pick up in Central Africa. You know what I mean? And, the browser has enabled you to, get an Uber. The browser right now has been has been pushed to the limit in the pandemic for a number of reasons, but you're purchasing, items in the browser right now. You're learning from home in the browser right now. You're conferencing from home in the browser right now. Like the browser has essentially helped the planet run, in this very, dire situation, and much of it has been to the sort of like glee of JavaScript developers, because the interaction, they're handling that, in various ways. And so to sort of like, you know, like I understand where, people and the animosity with, JavaScript developers and everything else. I mean, it gets into like, some political speak there at times, but I think it's important to know that, without JavaScript, we would not potentially be in the position we're in right now to operate. I know we're on a streaming platform right now, but I could have done this through the browser, and I think that's phenomenal. Like what the browser has enabled this world to do in G7 countries, right down to like small islands in the Caribbean, bar none, this is like the greatest leap in technology.
I wanna focus on the browser, and I want to focus on JavaScript jobs that are out there and talk about the different technologies. I did a bit of research. I have some stats here. So I went to Indeed and I looked at all of the software dev jobs in the USA. And out of all of those jobs, there are 415,000 jobs in the USA right now for software developers. Of them, Java has 61,000, Python is 55,000, JavaScript has 44,000, and I'm 100% sure they fluctuate based on what month it is, what time of year it is. After JavaScript, it just completely drops off. C is at 20,000, and Ruby is at 11,000. So Java, Python, and JavaScript are the top three, and I can tell you from experience, Java and Python, half of the developers on Java and Python are writing software that ultimately supports a browser application. So they're just backend developers writing code for the browser, but it's running on a server. Now, out of those, I'm going to hyper focus on just the 44,000 JavaScript jobs. Of the 44,000 JavaScript jobs, 20,000 are React jobs, and which means they have React somewhere in the job description. 17,000 are Angular, and TypeScript, I'm surprised, but TypeScript has 8,375 jobs, which says jobs that say TypeScript, we need 8,000 developers out there with TypeScript. And followed by, well, you're gonna laugh, but jQuery is still around. They have 8,000 jobs for jQuery as well, right up there with TypeScript. Then we have Vue and GraphQL at about 5,000.
So you just said that jQuery is as in demand as TypeScript. I'm taking that quote to the bank.
Yeah, right. Legacy software, man. Legacy software. Did you guys hear about that thing last year in New Jersey was looking for COBOL developers because they couldn't find enough COBOL developers? That was interesting. That they just.
I mean, when you have platforms that are just like chugging away on their own without anyone needing to sort of like keep a close eye on them, and then you have this sort of like surge, again getting back to, because I remember that whole moment, getting back to the pandemic. It's kind of like, oh my god, you know what I mean, like this thing that has been dormant for like all this time, now we're kind of like, is it going to explode because of this unusual moment in history? But getting back to the because I was in Jersey, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
of course it's New Jersey.
Yeah, I remember the whole press conference too, because I was like, wow, he said that's what he said. Yeah. But getting back to the jQuery, which is an interesting stat, and I'm sure like that's on a downward slope, but you have, if you look at anyone's interested, and I'll probably pull that up as well, but not during this moment. The HTTP archive keeps an eye on how the web was built, so from technologies to libraries, whatever it is, and jQuery is always number one. That's without a doubt, because again, you're talking about legacy software that just like got adopted wholeheartedly early, and just did its job very well, and people just kind of left it there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some persons out there, companies out there, that just want to know that someone's out there with that skill set. So maybe it's the beginning of the migration away from jQuery, but they need someone who's versed in the language, right? Well, language in jQuery. Do not forget that jQuery came about to handle some of the challenges in browsers. And I happen to know this simply because I'm a big fan of sort of like celebrating like moments in history. And I remember jQuery had I'll find that tweet as well. jQuery had sort of like hit this milestone. I think it was like 14 or 15 years. And I had a quick chat with John Resig, and he shared that jQuery was around to sort of like fix all these this idiosyncratic behavior between browsers. And jQuery came about in a day where Chrome didn't even exist yet. You know what I mean? Like, we know a lot of people like Chrome. They're pretty aggressive in sort of like adopting technologies, APIs, whatever. But at the time, they weren't around. At the time, it was I think Safari was at 1.0. I think Firefox may have been around 2 or 3.0. Netscape was still around, and IE was in the midst of its sort of like surge and rise. So, the fact that jQuery is around is not surprising. Again, it's probably some companies, I'm imagining, trying to sunset the framework, but they need people who have been around and understand it well to sort of make sure that things don't fall apart. That's all I want to say, I think.
You guys all notice that seamless flex that Henri had, where he was like, yeah, I just hang out with John Resig. No biggie.
Oh, I wasn't hanging out. I was like, believe me, I pinged him a bunch of times on Twitter. I'm like, would you please answer my 10th email?
No, I'm the same way. I'm like, yeah, no, Dad. Just like talking to Dad or Dabbit. No biggie. We have a good question in the chat actually about so this is a really good question about wanting to build fundamentals in JavaScript, but being asked for other things on the job application as well. And something that you'll hopefully be told by other people is that don't ever think you need to check every single box on a job application. That is like one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're looking at job applications. They think, oh, I shouldn't even bother applying to this if I don't check every box, because almost no one checks every single box on these job applications. They really overload them with a million things. But you do want to expand out beyond just learning basic JavaScript. There's always going to be this kind of tension of the fundamentals and the stuff you actually have to do on the job, because you're never going to write just very, very basic kind of DOM manipulation type JavaScript code. And this is why I was saying in my boot camp, we learned some basic kind of DOM stuff as a way to understand what we were going to do with React. So it's about learning enough to understand the base layers and then get out to the more complicated stuff. So for me, I always kind of thought of it as like, I want to spend, and it doesn't have to be necessarily 50-50. You can think of whatever kind of ratio is going to work for you. But I would think, maybe do half fundamental basic JavaScript stuff, then half crazy futuristic framework kind of stuff. And this is how I got involved with something like Redwood.js. Like, I would never tell someone to go 100% in on something like Redwood.js. But I would say if you go like 50% in on something like Redwood.js, it may end up having like maybe a huge boon for you. And like I attribute almost all of my success, including the job I have, to betting big on Redwood.js. So you want to try and split your time economically. Think of like, I only have so many hours in the day. How do I parcel this out so that I'm learning a little bit of fundamentals, and I'm also learning a cutting edge skill, and I'm also maybe doing like something futuristic that I can like put my name and my brand and my stamp on. And if you can kind of like try and split your time between a couple of those things, it'd be hard to keep a lot in your head, but that's just kind of like the nature of the beast in terms of what we're doing here.
Yep. I'm going to endorse that 200%. And, I don't know if he wants to hear me sort of like gloat about his come up, but, I remember listening to a good friend of mine's podcast, another gentleman who I think would be a fantastic guest here, by the way, a gentleman by the name of Brian Douglas, who's at GitHub. And Anthony was on his show. and I was like walking along listening, and I was listening to Anthony's story, and I remember getting back after my walk and DMing Brian. I was like, "Yo, this Anthony guy's going places." You know what I mean? Like the attitude and the curiosity is there, and I just felt like this is some of the tools that I think anyone new coming in would would could use. The mindset and the curiosity and a bit of like a go attitude as well. And I completely agree with the idea of uh, you know splitting your time between fundamentals and like experimenting. And I think some of the greatest sort of like acquisition of understanding, acumen comes around from experimenting a bit, you know, like digging into these dark corners that you're like, I'm not sure I'm going to understand this, but I'm going to read this anyways. And whether or not you sort of like talk about it on a blog or tweet about it and stuff like that, like I knew that when I first started to dabble in web performance, I was like, I'm not sure I understand everything here, but I'm going to sit down and read these books. And they're going to talk about some stuff I'm sure I'm not going to be too familiar with, but I have time and I have Google, the two things that are going to help. And it did, and I was one of a sort of like few in this field again. I was this new face, and I was sort of happy to sort of talk about it. And opportunities have come just from that, because they knew I was in that space. They knew I knew like the speak and whatnot, and understood what was going on at the browser level. And things have come around just because of my involvement that way. And I again, I'll say it like the way Anthony has sort of like sprung out of nowhere. Like Anthony, I actually believed, I didn't know why you were still at the boot camp. I remember I was telling Brian, I was like, what is he doing here? Be like, he knows what's going on. And it was great. It was great to watch. And I think a lot of people could sort of take some pointers from that, take some pointers from Brian. I don't want to say take some pointers from me, but I have these ideas on how I think people can be involved and become employable without having to be like, oh, I had to learn this, I had to learn that, I didn't know this. It's like, you'd be surprised. You could deep dive in a couple areas, and like someone will see that and say, hey, I have an opportunity here. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and I'd love to jump on what you're saying there, because I remember this, and I was saying to Monarch beforehand, I was like, me and Henri, I wouldn't say we know each other super well, but we're like Twitter friends, because I remember when you were saying like, hey, I listened, you just like kind of tweeted at me saying like, hey, I listened to your podcast interview, like it was cool, and you made some sort of joke about me playing the bass or whatever, and it's like that stuff sticks with you, because when you're coming up, like you're so desperate for just anything, any sort of come up, for anyone to notice you or just give you any sort of chance. So for someone like in the scene to be very supportive of you, like it means a lot, and those things stick with you, and that's the type of thing that I'm going to remember. I'm going to take with me for my whole career. So having people like Henri out there who are watching out for these new people coming up, like that's so important, and trying to like kind of suss out the scene of who is on the inside, who is going to be supportive of me as someone kind of on the outside, and find those people who can be a champion for you, or who could just should give you like moral support, just like saying like, hey, like you're doing the right thing, like you're on the right path, like you may not be there yet, but like you're going in the right direction. Just knowing that is like, it means so much.
You're so welcome, dude. I mean, like I was being super frank about it. I kind of recognized like you had a particular interest in it that you don't see often, and I was like, he's on the right path. And I kept telling Brian this. I'm like, this is like amazing. Aren't you a cellist, by the way?
It's the stand-up bass, not the cello. Yeah.
Okay,
so
sorry.
It's full-on bass, because I was originally electric bass, and
Okay.
then they told me I couldn't major on the electric bass, so I was going to be like a classical major, and so I literally learned the upright just to kind of get my degree. But I really loved it. I love playing jazz, so it's very fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of also jump on and talk about the question, which was, there's you're basically talking about efficiency here, right? You're bound by time, and what Anthony and Henri from experience, what both of them are trying to explain to you, I'll kind of shift the perspective and kind of turn it into a formula for you is you want maximum output for maximum input, so for minimum input. So you want more bang for your buck. And what that means is you have to be very mindful of what you're spending time on. Now, I'll tell you for a fact that you can apply for between 10 and 20 jobs in 1 hour if you don't customize your cover letters, don't customize your resumes, be smart about how you're presenting yourself, and just drop all of you're going to fail at 99% of your job applications, regardless of whether you customize for them or not. So just have 1 or 2 solid resumes and just apply to 10 or 20 jobs in 1 hour. And then that's it. Just do that 1 hour every day is my advice to you. That'll keep your engine going for a number of opportunities coming in. Now, the other side is, what do you focus on? There's so much to learn. There's fundamentals. There's all these cool tech, there's all this cool tech like GraphQL coming out. What do you learn? My advice to you is look at what's hot in the market and learn that. So right now, going back to my stats, you have React, Angular, TypeScript, jQuery, Vue, GraphQL. I would say those are some of the hottest technologies out there. If you just focus on React and TypeScript, there's a job waiting for you out there. If that's not to your liking, that's okay. You can get a job in React and CSS. You can get a job in Vue and CSS. Heck, you can get a job with just CSS and HTML. You can. Don't listen to anybody who says you can't, because I've seen it done. There's a ton of opportunity out there, but if you don't hyper focus on a specific job, you're not going to be able to get a job. Anthony just said, I can't write CSS to save my life. Yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way. You just do a little bit of market research and figure out what kinds of jobs there are out there. Some of them are more, there's this fantastic article from CSS Tricks from a couple of years ago, The Great Divide. And that article was about the difference between a front-end developer and a front-end developer. They both sound the same, but they're not the same. One person does HTML, CSS all day long. The other person does React and a little bit of APIs all day long.
I call it the front of the front end and the back of the front end is what I call it.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you gotta focus on being your fundamental values. Can you build something for someone? That's your fundamental value. And you should focus on being able to genuinely craft a product from scratch. That's what you should focus on. And the job applications, minimize your efforts, maximize your output, apply to 10 or 20 in an hour. Don't customize. That system will get you that job, in my opinion.
Something I'd love to share potentially, and this is in full support of what you said, but I kind of wanted to add a couple sprinkles that actually involve that, Anthony, as well. Definitely, build product, whatever. The one thing that I've always sort of recommended, and I tried people to not think in this particular way, is, I've heard and I've seen people say, like, I have to build something that is worthwhile, that's going to save society, that's going to be, something that people could use right away. And I'm just like, build silly stuff, what I mean? Because, at the end of the day, silly stuff still has to be sort of like architectured in particular fashion and whatnot. Like, there's still like technology involved in building silly things, so don't be afraid of doing that. Because you actually can get pretty good at a particular framework, whatever it is, even though your app was like comparing, Kanye quotes to like Trump quotes or something like that. Sounds silly on the surface, but I knew some people who had done that, and they had done it in particular technology. But the fact is, they were getting better and better by doing some of this silly work. So that's just one thing. So, I'm trying to get people out of the sort of this mindset that they have to build something that's going to be recognized. It's like, do not worry about that. People will recognize the technology. The one thing that was mentioned as well, it's like, get into a particular, X, Y, and Z, whether you want to get into JavaScript heavily, do it, yes, HTML, CSS are very employable. Chris Coyer, actually, we mentioned CSS Trick a couple of years ago. It said, and this is before CSS got even more detailed than it is today, he said that CSS, like a very good CSS developer will get a job. That's without a doubt, and if you see some of the work that's being done in CSS right now, it's absolutely phenomenal. So anyone who wants to deep dive in that area, I think I definitely suggest it if that's your thing, because I think I think CSS is so good right now. Like I've wanted to get back into it just to do more stuff in the browser, because, you know, like what was once a massive chore like 5 years ago now is like completely different. um, the one thing I'd love to stress, and this is where Anthony comes in again, um, you'd be surprised what could happen if you just hang around a community that you like. You like some work that's being done at Redwood JS, you're just suddenly hanging around. They're like, hey, there's that dude again. Just tell him to come in. We have lunch, dude. Come on down. Next, you're hanging around the maintainers, the core maintainers of a particular library, whatnot. And as they develop, you develop as well. You see exactly what's going on. And the next thing you know, you might be employed in that ecosystem, that particular area of the web, whatever it is that they're working on, because you've been around for like a year and a half, watching it being sort of like, come out of nowhere. It's just like some of the people, I'll tell you right now, who worked on the early versions of jQuery. John Resig talked about this. He's like, the people who worked on jQuery very early went on to getting jobs at like all the major browsers, or they've done significant work, they've written books or whatever. So the idea that you sort of hang around a community of developers that are like-minded, whether it be CSS folks, whether it be JavaScript developers, or whatever else is being done, just being part of that community will also help you, will also benefit you, and give you potentially an upper hand in finding some work, because they've seen your work as a contributor, and they might just say, hey, come in, we have to have a coffee, I want to talk to you about this opportunity coming up. No resume needed, because they know who you are.
If you think about, I love what you said about communities, and hanging out with communities will just really blow you away with how powerful that is. I think a lot of people think, oh, I gotta apply for jobs, I gotta just do that, or they use this word networking, and they say, I gotta network. And yeah, there's a lot of power in applying for jobs. There's a lot of power in networking, and I'm not gonna knock those two because I do both. But just hanging out with like-minded people, that's what human beings have been doing for millennia, and you can finally do it without getting out of your home. Guess what? There is such a thing as evolutionary biology, and you're hardwired to want to sit around a campfire and talk to people. And guess what? So are your employers. So I think that's spot on. If you guys are following how big Discord has gotten recently, there's so many communities on Discord. If you guys look at Reddit and realize that every single subreddit is a community with a core piece of a few members like moderators, and then you have an outer circle, and then you have an outer circle. Every single community of Mintbean community is like that. I'm sure Jamstack Toronto is like that too. And Anthony got so much opportunity just from doing exactly that. I saw him come up through that method. It wasn't even a method. It was just Anthony being Anthony, just being a genuine dude, just talking about stuff that mattered with people who wanted to listen. And over time, just got the opportunities came organically without Anthony feeling like he's talking to people with an agenda, because he wasn't. He was just being himself.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
I think it's a beautiful thing that you said, Andre.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, speaking of Toronto, hello, he, if you ever get an opportunity to read or even listen to, I think he's got a version online, The Tipping Point, and he talks about obviously the tipping point, which is like this. Everyone's got this moment where things just turn for the better, and mostly, and but he talked about the people involved in getting that turn. There's always like this, a few individuals who are just kind of like lurking around, and that you befriend. And he mentioned how important these persons are, and these people, you're only going to run into them by being part of communities. and you may not know them very well, but they're watching your work. They may not say anything, but they're keeping an eye on your contributions. And out of nowhere, you get a DM one day because you better be on Twitter, or whatever. You could be a little message on GitHub, whatever. But they're like, hey, what's up? You've been doing some fantastic work. And next, again, you're having this conversation about, an opportunity come up. And that is, I believe there's no better sensation knowing that, someone's reached out. They haven't asked for your resume. They haven't asked for, anything else, but they've been watching you work, and they realize that there's something bubbling there, and they want to sort of like bring up an opportunity that they'd like to speak to you about. So, I mean, I think it's amazing.
This is also where meetups come in that are so important. Like if we're saying, go out and congregate and be around people, it's like, well, you gotta have a place to do that. So that's where people like you come in, hosting these meetups, having these spaces, and take advantage of that. Like that's one of the biggest things that we haven't talked about yet is like,
Yep.
There's so many of these meetups and you can just go, especially since they're online now. And so I went to a bunch of these meetups. I've been to Jamstack Toronto, I've been to Jamstack Denver, and all these Jamstacks, and they're great. It's a really good way to meet people. And Mintbean has tons and tons of really great events too that you can come to. So just find your people, get out there, and just like that's going to take you so far, and it's going to make it more enjoyable. Like this is such a lonely journey to try and do this by yourself, and having other people that can help support you and that can help guide you in the right direction, like it's so invaluable, and so many people just don't even take advantage of it. Like there's all this opportunity out there if you just look for it.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead. You want to say?
I was just gonna say, don't be a lurker. Contribute. Just say hello, meet people, and don't be afraid of speaking your mind in public. Just don't be a lurker. Have your voice heard.
Yep. I don't know how many people. I know there's just two dozen here. Want to share in the chat whether or not they've been to a conference, what their experience was like. But I will say this: one of the reasons why people miss conferences so much, especially people who liked frequenting conferences, and you might hear them talk about the hallway track. And the hallway track was basically, uh, after a conference or after a talk or during lunch hour, during a conference, people would just kind of hang out in the hallway and just kick it. Some people believe that is the most important part of a conference. The content is cool. You're probably going to get it on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it after, but that hallway track, as they call it, where people are just hanging out, kicking it, like-minded people having conversation, about technology, maybe not about technology, but they might be sort of like on the sort of like outskirts of it. Lots is happening right there. Work opportunities are being discussed right there, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to sort of see that anytime soon, but it's going to happen now in these kind of platforms. As Anthony said, meetups, I think, are going to be very important in this space. And even for you to be recognized, that's a whole different conversation. If you ever want to get to the speaking, there's been no better time to speak at a meetup than this period right now, because I'm in Toronto. Anthony, where you at, by the way?
I'm in California, like Bay Area, Pleasanton,
okay,
California.
Cool.
Yeah.
You're in the Bay Area. We're on Toronto here mostly. And if I want to speak at Front End Osaka, I can. The only challenge is whether or not I want to stay up late or get up early. Like whatever's going to work. You can essentially submit a CFP or whatever it is to anything right now taking place, as long as it's if it's within your sort of time zone, even better. If it's not, guess what, it might take a little bit of effort, but prior to that it would have been more complicated: flight, hotel, yada yada yada. Whereas nowadays it's like, hey, it's all online, one sort of like flat platform. So there are opportunities, I think, that are pretty much hiding in plain sight, and hopefully you can take advantage of these moments.
I think that brings us to a close, actually. And I think that's a great point to close it on. It's 3:25 up here in Toronto, and we started about an hour and 10 minutes ago. If anybody would like to continue the conversation, let's take it on Twitter. Hit up hashtag Mintbean. I'll start a tweet, and let's continue this. Let's make Twitter our hallway today. Let's do this. Let's make Twitter our hallway. Let's chit chat in the hallway that is Twitter, and let's see where this goes. I'll drop a tweet, and let's all connect over there. Twitter is the hallway of life, according to Anthony Campello. Okay, I gotta frame that and put it up somewhere. So hashtag Mintbean, super easy, and I will drop the first message, or anybody else can. Honestly, I think it's whoever drops the first message really gets the conversation going. So if anybody wants to beat me to the punch, go for it. I will see y'all in the hallway. And
thanks for having us, Monarch. It was awesome getting to finally get a chance to chat with you, Henri, and get some FaceTime. I'm a huge fan of what you do, and just keep doing you, man.
I mean, it was a pleasure to hang out with everyone. I'm always super accessible on Twitter. Happy to always kick you with folks. You know, I even do these sort of one-on-ones sometimes when, you know, people just want to chit chat as well. I'll just jump on a Zoom and yeah, I mean, share any additional details that I may not have expanded on. But yeah, I mean, I think this, you know, as Drake would say, what a time to be alive, you know, not quite the mixtape, but yeah, I think there are opportunities abound.
For sure. And here we go. I am going to tweet right now, and I'll do it on the screen so everybody.
Oh, on the screen.
What are you doing with light mode, bro? I got light mode going on.
I know what's going on.
My life is in dark mode. I need some light. Some light.
I mean, you got that bright room going on, you know, so it's like clearly it's a fit.
There's something there. I don't know. The predictions podcast is all white too. I don't know what it is. Henri, it was a pleasure meeting you. Hey, we should definitely hang out.
Oh, I'm with it, man.
Once this whole thing is over, like we should definitely catch up and get some beers. Anthony, you should fly up. Totally.
We'll have a banger for sure.
Yeah.
Seriously. But yeah, man, everyone, happy to chat online, whatever. But you know, Mintbean, everyone, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Sorry, I was a few minutes late. I was just reclining on this stool I have here. It's like, but yeah, man, have a great day, everyone, and stay safe.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.
Bye bye.
Cheers.